of exploded. Everybody just started talking about it, and people wanted to know what was going on, how did this happen? In a lot of ways, it was kind of a classic whodunit when you add to the fact that his son is the most famous NBA player in the world. That fuels the speculation of what might have been the cause. What does this have to do with Michael Jordan?
Hey everyone, welcome to How It Really Happened. I'm Hill Harper. The relationship between a father and son is powerful. But not every dad passes on wisdom, strength, and affection to his little man. Basketball superstar Michael Jordan was raised by an extraordinary set of parents. And the father he looked up to was James Raymond Jordan. Mr. Jordan was a positive and loving childhood role model, and also a vital part of Michael's life and success as a famous adult. But in the summer of 1993, at a time when his airness soared over the entire basketball world, James Jordan suddenly vanished. And the mysterious disappearance of the Jordan family patriarch changed Michael Jordan's life forever. Here's how it really happened.
In the summer of '93, Michael Jordan was bigger than basketball.
He just won his third championship in a row.
The gold medal headlines were written months ago when the NBA decided to go USA.
He had been a major factor in the dream team, Team USA, winning the gold in the 1992 Olympics in Barcelona.
MJ's first NBA championship came against the legendary Los Angeles Lakers. And as always, his father was right there with him.
I remember him cradling the trophy in the locker room in Los Angeles, sort of an iconic image of James and Michael together and celebrating.
Being African-American, I really had an affinity for Michael Jordan. I appreciated his success. Air Jordans were popular.
He was always aware about his image.
Yo, this is Mars Blackman, and this is my main man, Michael Jordan.
I remember from early on when he would do the commercials with Spike Lee.
It's the vicious stunts.
No Mars. And the Mars Blackman commercials, and they were just so funny and great. I want to be like Mike, be like Michael Jordan.
I still feel blessed that I got the chance to watch him in the prime of his career.
It was a thing of beauty to see.
Ruthless because he wanted to win. He had the tongue thing. His tongue always hung out.
He comes out and starts floating, and he starts moving in hyperspeed. Michael Jordan scored 12 points in 4 minutes. Like, damn.
I think that Michael Jordan is the closest thing in terms of what is a real-life superhero.
To take off and literally fly, that's what it looked like.
I don't know where you could have been in the world and not have known about Michael Jordan.
I have the advantage of looking at him as a son as opposed to looking at him as a superstar.
Michael respected his father like nobody else because his father was his best friend, his father was his mentor and his advisor.
He loved his father dearly.
I would see them sometimes, they'd be talking about things. Sometimes they'd laugh. Other times it would be serious and stern. And I think that James was just the absolute best father that Michael Jordan could have.
My wish for every young child, black and white, that they have the relationship that Michael Jordan had with his father.
The cherry red Lexus was a gift from Michael Jordan to his beloved father.
It was a flashy car, it was a fancy car.
It was an item of pride for Mr. Jordan.
He loved the vehicle.
When you look back on it, it's heartbreaking.
That would be the last moment, the last championship he got to share with his father.
On July 22nd, 1993, Michael Jordan's mother and father are at their home, which is near Charlotte, North Carolina.
So it's early in the morning, and they're headed in different directions. Dolores is flying off on a 2-week trip to the West Coast.
James Jordan is staying in North Carolina for his own personal reasons for another day.
But it would be the last moment they spend together.
July 22nd, 1993, he had gone to his former home in Wilmington for the funeral of a friend and former co-worker.
Wilmington was the place where James Jordan had his roots. He made his living. He had his home.
He was such a kind man, and the community all loved him.
So the church service ends, and James stays on in town to go to dinner to catch up with friends for a few hours.
Sometime after midnight, he got into his car and began what will be a 3-hour trip home.
He drove down 95, tired that night. As travelers often do, he pulled over near Lumberton, North Carolina, and decided to close his eyes for a few minutes and rest.
The next day, he was scheduled to fly to Chicago for a special celebrity sports dinner hosted by Michael.
He and Michael were going to play golf together.
He didn't show up.
He ended up missing that flight on the 23rd.
People can sometimes inadvertently make themselves even more vulnerable by being in unfamiliar surroundings and not being alert to the potential dangers that could be out there and ultimately find them.
It was weird that he stopped his car to rest at that particular place on I-95 in the middle of nowhere. It's not a safe place.
I really urge everyone to take time out for the family.
In the middle of the night, James Jordan was alone, driving home from a visit to Wilmington. He had a plane to catch in a few hours to participate in a charity golf match with his famous son, Michael. But Mr. Jordan missed that flight, and ultimately, he never showed up at the golf outing.
The fact that he didn't make it to the tournament was noticed, but no one was really worried about it. He's known for keeping a loose schedule, known for disappearing for days, and known for doing so without telling friends, family, or business associates.
Nobody thought anything of it. And then he went missing for the next 21 days.
Let's go back a little. Michael Jordan, it might be known by many, was born in Brooklyn. We're two Brooklyn guys talking here.
His father had gone to Brooklyn to study aircraft maintenance, and the family had moved there for that purpose. James Jordan was a man of doing and fixing things. That was the big value in his life. That was his identity.
And my mother was pregnant, and she had me when I was in Brooklyn.
In February of 1963, on a rainy day, he was born with a bloody nose after a fairly swift but somewhat troubled delivery.
I stayed there a year, and they brought me back to North Carolina, and that's where I grew up.
James Jordan and his young wife, they were both special people. Dolores Jordan would become a bank teller. It was a family ready to move into the new age of opportunity for African Americans that was beginning to open up in the 60s. They soon were on their way to the things that all Americans have cherished for many, many years. That is home ownership, and that is raising a family.
James Jordan could be hard on young Michael, and there's a famous tough love moment that left a lasting impression. Michael was nearby as his father worked on something mechanical. He was asked to get a specific wrench out of the toolbox, but young Michael didn't know one tool from another, and James lashed out at his son.
Just go on in the house with the women.
Go in the kitchen with the girls.
There are millions of words probably that Michael Jordan's father said to him But those words are the ones that survive in memory.
It was the sting of those words that created the ruthless intensity and the competitiveness that we all know about Michael Jordan, both on and off the court.
Almost like he was in a shouting match across time with the old man. What do you think of me now?
Were you a gifted athlete early?
I was a late bloomer.
When James Jordan puts a basketball hoop up in his backyard, now there's nonstop basketball and daily battles between two brothers.
Michael grew up in awe of his brothers and of his brother Larry in particular.
Larry would always get the better of Michael until Michael started to grow.
But he knew he had to go through Larry to get to where he wanted to go. Michael come out of situations in the NBA games playing with some of the other best players in the league, and it would be easy for him because of the shit Larry put him through.
Man, they would go at each other.
James was a father who let his boys play rough, but he never let it go too far.
My basketball skills developed real late, and my height and everything started to come a little bit later than most normal people.
Were you widely recruited?
No.
As late as his senior year in high school, he was ready to go off into the Air Force, just like his dad. But then the coaches at the University of North Carolina came knocking at his door.
I learned the fundamentals of the game, the mind and the thought process that comes along with the game. I put 2 and 2 together, and I evolved as a complete player.
James, Jordan, and Dolores, suddenly they were traveling to the games and part of that frenzy and worship and excitement. It was a glorious time in their lives.
People can sometimes inadvertently make themselves even more vulnerable by being in unfamiliar surroundings and not being alert to the potential dangers that could be out there and ultimately find them. In the summer of 1993, for James Jordan, he found himself tired and alone in a car, and he decided to park along the side of the road on the outskirts of a town called Lumberton in Robeson County, North Carolina.
Near the intersection of I-95 and US 74.
Mr. Jordan had no idea what he had just driven himself into.
He fell asleep with his windows down, the doors unlocked. It was desolate. It was dark. It's not a safe place.
There is crime everywhere.
Was it the wrong place to choose to do that? Absolutely.
2 weeks after Mr. Jordan exited the interstate for what he thought was going to be a short nap, police made a mysterious discovery miles away near Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Authorities got a tip of a luxury car found in a wooded rural area, stripped, vandalized, and the license plate was missing.
Because of its rundown condition, police officers could not immediately tell who owned the abandoned vehicle.
It took days, but the sheriff's department later ascertained that the red Lexus belonged to James Jordan.
His Lexus was found, but he wasn't in it.
Mr. James Jordan is missing.
Word spread to the public like lightning that Michael Jordan's father had vanished and was nowhere to be found.
Public reaction was shock, sadness, disbelief.
It literally was the world turning to look at what was happening.
We processed the car last night for latent prints, also for luminol of the car to see if there's any presence of blood. Those tests were negative.
He was the father of the world's most famous basketball player. No one heard from him for 3 weeks.
Mr. James Jordan has disappeared under highly suspicious circumstances. It looks like foul play. The Jordan family is sick with worry, and Michael Jordan's fans lend instant support for their #1 hero, the superstar they see everywhere they look. Not far away from the spot where James Jordan pulled over to take a nap, detectives were working on a mysterious swamp investigation.
The mystery of John Doe began on August 3rd, 1993, in a place called Gum Swamp.
The swamp is black in color.
Almost the color of coffee, strong tea.
A local fisherman spotted a body on a windy creek wedged between two trees, face down.
Al Locklear found the body August 3rd. He'd come to do some fishing when he spotted a man's body snagged on a tree.
It just looked like a dummy mannequin or whatever.
The sheriff's department and the coroner's office are called in to figure out who is this person and what happened to them.
There was absolutely no identification on this body.
The John Doe had been dead for between 7 and 21 days.
The cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the chest. It severed the aorta. It was a .38 caliber bullet lodged in the body. It was murder. Detectives had very few clues. The police were stumped. He had extensive dental work, bridges, root canals, a full restoration.
That kind of dental work is something that the police and coroners could use to help identify the John Doe.
You gotta wait a little bit to hopefully that you'll get some leads.
On August 7th, the coroner collected other remains, bones, and other samples, and the body was cremated. It was then the pieces started coming together.
Tim Brown, the coroner in the unsolved John Doe case, then sees a CBS breaking news story from Connie Chung.
Father of basketball star Michael Jordan. James Jordan has been missing now for 3 weeks.
I was with my family at home watching the evening news and learned from the reports that James Jordan was missing and his car was discovered there in Cumberland County.
Brown thinks that his John Doe just might be James Jordan.
It flashed through my mind that it was a possibility that it could be the John Doe.
The coroner starts to make calls to see if he can get the dental records from Mr. Jordan's dentist to compare them to his John Doe.
That's when everything kind of clicked and came together.
So on August 13th, the dental records that authorities received were matched to those of the John Doe, identifying him as James Jordan, the father of Michael Jordan, the world's most famous basketball player.
It was a media circus. There's a crush of cameras, and there were satellite trucks as far as the eye could see.
It literally was the world turning to look at what was happening.
The public reaction was shock, sadness, disbelief.
Having met Mr. Jordan, it was heart-wrenching. I almost had a sort of an out-of-body experience.
I was working at the radio station. My news director said, James Jordan's, Michael's dad was murdered. And kind of hit me like it is now.
There were some mysterious circumstances surrounding the James Jordan tragedy, and they created an outbreak of conspiracy theories.
Why was he killed? Was there something that's hidden that we're not aware of that was involved with his death?
All of those kinds of things become the feast of conspiracy.
A captivating kind of story to cover.
Investigators, reporters, and the public all wondered, how could Mr. Jordan's disappearance have seemingly gone unnoticed for about 3 full weeks?
Police only then learned no one had seen the elder Jordan since a funeral 3 weeks earlier in a town about 50 miles away.
Even as his 57th birthday approached, on July 31st, no one took real notice. There was no planned celebration.
Some people cited that as saying, well, that's just strange, and that must mean that there's something going on.
What has the family told you with regard to what's been happening or what happened?
Well, really, I'm not at liberty to discuss that. We learned that Mr. James Jordan had a tendency, if he went somewhere, he would stay for a period of time and no one know where he was.
The FBI is looking into debts James Jordan owed to a company he owned in South Carolina. He had reportedly run into tax trouble while running JVL Enterprises, a business that makes T-shirts, shorts, and socks.
We knew that the business that he was involved in Charlotte was failing, and we knew of other ventures that had failed. We didn't see that as problematic.
Michael Jordan likes to gamble and caused a flap during the NBA series in New York earlier this year when he went to a New Jersey casino.
You had the speculation, well, he was killed or he's missing because of Michael's gambling.
Authorities had to look at it.
Jordan made headlines with an overnight gambling junket to Atlantic City. And later, his father said that casino trip was his idea. Now, whether that controversy had anything to do with this murder is now a matter of speculation.
You were mad over being questioned about it? How do you view the press and the athlete?
I felt that they were attacking me in a situation that didn't need to be attacked. And a lot of speculations that was going on.
Attacking you by merely asking questions?
Speculating about some things that they really didn't have true facts about, tying in connections that shouldn't have never been tied into, leaving more room for speculations in that sense, which gives them a little bit more power than I think was necessary.
There was a probe with the NBA about Michael Jordan's gambling. They looked into it.
It turns out there was absolutely no connection between the gambling and the murder.
They see a man sleeping in the vehicle. And when he woke up, he shot.
The phone records really laid out a map of what transpired.
Welcome back to How It Really Happened. Law enforcement officers have positively identified their John Doe murder victim as James Jordan, the missing father of basketball superstar Michael Jordan. With that critical development, detectives urgently opened a homicide case to find out who did it and how it happened. And the Jordan family, together with legions of Michael Jordan fans everywhere, demanded answers. Will good old-fashioned police work crack the case and lead to justice for this unsolved murder? The hunt for the killer, or killers, is on.
For Michael Jordan, this has been a summer that's run the emotional gamut. From the triumph of an NBA title in June to the tragic death of a loved one in August.
It was such a huge story. Everybody knew who Michael Jordan was. Everybody could identify with him, that he had suffered this loss. Why was he killed?
A fisherman went to the gum swamp. As he was preparing to fish, he noticed something, and he really wasn't sure what it was.
SWAT, you found the body out here? Do you think it was a human body?
No, not at first.
When you found out it was, what did you?
I was scared.
For prosecutor Johnson Britt, there were two powerful images that he couldn't get out of his mind. One was the haunting image of James Jordan's body laying in a swamp.
That's an image that you might envision in a horror movie.
It's hard to sleep at night, knowing what it was. It was a body.
The other image, weeks earlier, you had witnessed the Bulls win their third NBA championship. Michael weeping, his father comes and consoles him. So you take the two images, you put them together, and they're inseparable for me.
Our investigation up to this point has been an attempt to identify this person. Now that it is identified, we can start on the murder investigation.
Everyone was curious to know, how did this happen? There were lots of questions.
So it was a real whodunit.
Despite being stripped and abandoned, James Jordan's luxury car still contained clues that would unlock the mystery of his murder.
In 1993, when the vehicle was found, it had a cell phone in it. This would have been a cell phone that you like see back in the day in James Bond movies.
The phone records really laid out a map of what transpired.
You can see the history of calls made by Mr. James Jordan.
And then suddenly,
bam, you have one call that's out of the ordinary.
The first call that was made that was in question was a call to a sex line.
The doctor's reasoning would say, well, Mr. Jordan is not making these calls.
Veteran investigators have pinpointed the moment they believed the victim stopped using his cell phone, and they started tracking down who could possibly have been making these suspicious new calls. Investigators then met face-to-face with the people who received calls in order to find out precisely who had contacted them.
And an overwhelming majority of the phone calls came back to this individual named Daniel Green. Other calls were identified having been made by Larry Demery.
They made more than 30 calls.
They're calling their friends and family from the deceased's phone, getting into this luxury Lexus, and took this 4-day joyride.
As it turned out, a friend of mine actually saw Daniel Green and Larry Demery.
And a fairly new red Lexus pulls up next to me during a stoplight, which caught my eye. And I noticed there were two young guys in the front seat looking happy-go-lucky. And immediately I'm thinking of my children, that if I had that car, they would not be driving that car.
They just out trying to impress people.
Who are these teenagers?
They learned that Daniel Green had a brother who was in the U.S. Army and was stationed at Fort Bragg.
When they interviewed him, he placed Daniel Green and Larry Demery in the red Lexus at his residence.
Been talking to the brother, Daniel Green. I mentioned having the car of Mr. James Jordan.
He showed him a set of golf clubs that were in the trunk of this car. Well, guess whose name is on that golf bag? It was Michael Jordan's.
Right away, investigators want to talk to Daniel Green and Larry Demery to find out whether these two teens had any involvement in the death of James Jordan.
Officers were assigned to go find Daniel Green.
What was their motivation? Everyone was curious to know, how did this happen?
Detectives arrived at Daniel Green's mother's home, armed with a search warrant, and determined to bring her son in for questioning.
The SBI agents who were conducting the search seized two very valuable pieces of evidence.
Within Daniel Green's bedroom was a .38 caliber revolver handgun and a vacuum cleaner. The important fact of the handgun was that it was the same caliber bullet that was used to kill Mr. James Jordan.
They noticed there were videotapes stacked up. All but one had a wrapper, and an FBI agent took it, not knowing what might be on it.
The discovery of the .38 caliber weapon was not necessarily the smoking gun. Ballistic tests would need to be done to determine whether it was just similar to or whether it was the actual murder weapon. Detectives looked to see if Green and Demery had a history of past crimes and were struck by the seriousness of their prior convictions for people so young.
Arrests for aggravated assault, robbery.
Larry Demery and Daniel Green have known each other since childhood.
They considered themselves brothers.
According to their records, they were progressing in the crimes they were involved in.
Those two kids are scared of no one. They have no respect for law enforcement. They have no respect for anyone.
Both of them were involved in robbery of people out of Rhode Island.
These are clearly two troubled kids with serious criminal histories, but are they really capable of such violence?
Investigators needed to run down every possible connection between the two teenagers and the father of one of the most famous men on the planet in order to find out what they knew.
When Daniel Green and Larry Demery were brought in for questioning,
they both had an initial story that mirrored each other.
The two suspects said they were not guilty.
But when detectives punched holes in their statements, Green suddenly started offering wild new versions of events.
And then he would modify it. That these unknown people showed up at his house. They were in dark suits.
With the car, wanting to sell it to him for $45.
It was just too unbelievable to even consider credible.
When the police played the VHS tape taken from the home of Daniel Green, it turned out to be an incriminating homemade video starring Daniel Green.
First name, then L, last name Green, of the Green family, and Green as in tree.
The video was was shot in the living room of his mother's house.
Daniel Green was talking about you shoot a man in the head, you take his money.
Daniel Green had the audacity to wear a watch that MJ had given to his father.
And the NBA All-Star ring.
Daniel Green was videotaping himself, showing off the ring, basically letting everyone know, I got this big ring.
I felt totally disgusted. Really disgusted.
In building the case against Demery and Green, investigators had compelling circumstantial evidence, but they needed a big break to take the case to trial. And it finally came from one of the two prime suspects.
Larry Demery made a full confession of his role in the murder of James Jordan.
In this case, acting in concert, aiding and abetting, which would make him equally liable, even though he didn't ever touch the gun.
And Demery's confession lined up neatly with the evidence the officers had already compiled in their case, that his accomplice, Daniel Green, was the shooter.
The gun was found on Daniel's relative's property, not Larry's. No fingerprints of Larry's on the gun.
Daniel Green had all the spoils from the murder of James Jordan.
Very damning evidence that he was involved in the crime.
In the early morning hours on Sunday, August 15th, 1993, investigators made the arrest of Daniel Green and Larry Demery for the murder of James Jordan. In a heartbreaking parallel, later that same day, Michael Jordan and his family mourned the passing of his father in a memorial.
For Michael Jordan and his family, it was a day of finality.
There was a small service in a small church, Teaching, North Carolina.
Michael Jordan issued a statement describing his family as tight-knit, his father's death as shocking.
He encouraged everybody there not to focus on the details, but instead to focus on his father, the fact that he had been such a good father.
Michael Jordan reflected on how the healing bonds of family helped him get through his father's memorial service in The Last Dance.
It was devastating, but my mother was so strong. And the first thing she says, you gotta be thankful, and I started looking at the positives.
Based on the confession, and combined with all the other recovered evidence, the prosecution slowly built a working theory of what really happened to James Jordan on July 23rd, 1993, after he left dinner with a friend in Wilmington and began that fateful drive home to Charlotte in the pre-dawn darkness.
Daniel Green and Larry Demery were at the Quality Inn to rob somebody because they had done it before and got away with it. And they see this red Lexus on the side of Highway 74 in the gravel.
Mr. Jordan is in his car asleep when the two suspects come up to him.
They don't know who's inside the vehicle. The passenger side window is down maybe 4 or 5 inches. Both Daniel Green and Larry Demery look inside the vehicle.
They observed a black man recline back in the driver's seat. They saw the jewelry that he was wearing.
The killers target the Lexus, thinking the sleeping driver might be a drug dealer or possibly
a college student. And they intend to take the car and, rob this college student. They swoop down on the passenger side of the car, figuring out how they're gonna work this out. They go back up to the window. Daniel Green has the .38 caliber handgun. And Mr. James Jordan happens to wake up.
When Mr. Jordan stirred, Daniel Green stuck the gun inside the car and fired a single shot.
Mr. James Jordan was shot in the chest area, near the heart, and he bled basically internally. And that's why there was not a lot of blood found in the vehicle. Larry Demery said after Daniel Green shot James Jordan, he got into the car, pushed James Jordan into the passenger seat, and drove off with Larry Demery following him. After They discovered who it was. Daniel Green said,
I think we've killed Michael Jordan's father.
Larry Demery said, no, you did.
Just a few months after the murder of his father, Michael Jordan held a shocking and life-changing press conference.
I'm very solid with my decision of not to play the game of basketball in the NBA.
On October 6, 1993, tired of his fame, disillusioned by allegations of illegal betting, and crushed by the murder of his father, Michael Jordan announced his retirement.
I guess the biggest positive thing that I can take out of my father not being here with me today is that he saw my last basketball game, and that means a lot. I'm happy with my decision, and I don't have any reservations about it.
When Michael Jordan retired, I wasn't surprised because the devastation of his father was really difficult.
In one of the few times Michael Jordan has spoken out, he told Oprah exactly how he was choosing to deal with the death of his dad.
But Michael, you know what's interesting to me? I've heard you talk about it where you say my father who passed. And I always think, I mean, I know he had to pass, but I think he was murdered. And the fact that he was murdered is a searing kind of pain. I mean, have you dealt with that? Have you accepted the fact he was murdered?
No, because I'm a very optimistic person to a sense that I don't look at the real bad part of it. I look at no matter what happened to my father, he's not here.
Yeah.
So he's passed to me.
When Michael Jordan told Oprah Winfrey that his father passed, that's how he lives with the death of his father.
I want to look at it in a good sense, because I think that's the part to help me get over that situation.
The murder trial began on January 3rd of 1996, and guilty as charged Larry Demery would be the all-star witness for the state in their case against Daniel Green.
His version of what happened is more consistent with what the independent evidence showed us.
Ballistics experts examined the bullet to see if it had come from the .38 that had killed Mr. Jordan.
They could not eliminate that bullet having been fired from that gun.
The results were inconclusive, but the evidence was enough to be admitted at trial.
That goes to the circumstantial evidence of the case.
I didn't have any doubts that the bullet was one that came from that same gun.
Daniel Green was convicted of first-degree felony murder. He was convicted of robbery with a dangerous weapon, and he was convicted of conspiracy to commit robbery with a dangerous weapon.
The jury in this case having unanimously recommended a sentence of life imprisonment
plus 10 years for the conspiracy charge.
One way or another, Daniel Green's going to prison for a very long time.
Since Larry Demery pled guilty before trial, he was already convicted of first-degree murder.
So they were both convicted of first-degree murder and got life sentences by separate juries.
The day after the jury found Daniel Green guilty of first-degree murder, Francis Weller conducted a phone interview with him.
All right, you never did take the witness stand, so I'm going to ask you something now that you never answered in court. Did you or did you not kill James Jordan?
No, ma'am, I did not kill Mr. Jordan, and I've never killed anybody, and I never tried to kill anybody.
You were in his car, James Jordan's car, so it would stand to reason that you were perhaps the last person to see him alive.
Well, no, ma'am, I don't think so. I mean, there were other people that were in the car. I mean, there were several people that were in the car.
Okay, if you're saying you didn't kill James Jordan, then who do you think did?
I would have to say, with the way everything has turned out, I would have to say that Larry had to kill him. Because if he didn't, then he wouldn't have pleaded guilty and he wouldn't have testified against me.
When I walked away from that interview, I thought, someone could almost say he's being skillful and playing psychology at his best, but he's guilty as hell.
How it really happened requested comment from Daniel Green, and this is the statement provided by his new attorney.
most important thing we need to learn about Michael Jordan and James Jordan relationship is that it is a love story. It's a love story between the father and son.
You think of Michael Jordan, this huge icon who was perhaps at that point in time the most well-known person on the planet. And he would melt when he would see his dad.
They were able to share that ride together. James was still proud of his son as a son. Not necessarily the Michael Jordan, the global icon, just proud of his son as a son.
And even in James Jordan's passing, I am certain James Jordan is still a very big part of who Michael Jordan is today.
Each summer since 1993 marks another anniversary since James Jordan's death. If anything, his famous son has gone on to successes that surely would have increased the beaming pride of a father. 3 more NBA championships, NBA ownership, and the expansion of MJ's brand into the billions. Michael has spoken of his father's ongoing presence in his life. Special moments that come in the form of silent inner thoughts. They are MJ's loving memories of the way the two had always talked together. I'm Hill Harp. Thanks for watching. Good night.